Star Wars 7x7, episode 2549. Bounty Lost is episode 9 of The Bad Batch, and this is our official Bad Batch briefing on the episode, which turns out actually confirmed a couple of things we've been saying on the show. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, Bounty Lost, episode 9, and this is a full spoiler briefing. If you've been with the show for any amount of time, then you know how that goes. So, let's just dive right in. So, we are picking right up after the events of the previous episode reunion, and it's as action-packed as you could ever hope it would be. First of all, them escaping from Crosshair, the Bad Batch, and having to decide that they're going to jump away from hyperspace even though they have no idea where Omega is, and that's of course frustrating, but Crosshair is leading the attack and they're shooting at the Bad Batch, but the Bad Batch manages to get away. And I know we talked the other day about the mid-season sneak peek, and that the only scenes that seemed to be new, at least through my eyes at the time, were a couple of things actually that are going to show up in this episode, as it turns out. There were a couple of scenes that we didn't talk about that I didn't realize were new, but it seemed like, I guess, they were familiar, like ships shooting at the Bad Batch and it getting shot. Well, it turns out that happened in this episode as well, and that may have been the version that we saw in the sneak peek. And also Wrecker looking down through some sort of manhole-like opening, which wasn't a manhole, it was an escape pod hatch, docking hatch kind of situation, and that showed up in this episode as well. But really, we're bearing the lead here because the big deal of this episode is finding out what the deal is with Omega. And I gotta say, I feel like there's still another shoe to drop, but let's pursue that at a later date. Right now, the main reveal is that Omega is an unaltered clone like Boba Fett, and a first generation clone in the parlance of the Kaminoans. And that goes back to Lama Su's concern about the genetic material that they have on file for Jango Fett is continuing to deteriorate. So really, Omega is the only source, the purest source that they have of that genetic material. And so you can see why the Kaminoans want to get Omega back. However, that's where things get a little bit complicated. See, it turns out that Fennec Shand was hired not just by the Kaminoans in general, but by Nala Se in specific, by the chief medical scientist for the Kaminoan cloners. And to what purpose that is, we don't yet know. That still has to be revealed. We know sort of the negation of the purpose, which is not to let Omega fall into the hands of Lama Su, because as we see in the episode, Lama Su just wants to extract the DNA and is fine with killing Omega once they get her DNA, or the DNA, out of her. And that in itself is wild, because why wouldn't you keep her around? I mean, you take some DNA now, and then if you need more DNA later, then you can take more DNA. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of the Grogu situation in The Mandalorian, where they're like, all right, we just, took enough so that we could do the experiments we needed. We didn't kill him or anything like that, but, we're going to need more and get him back for more, right? But the Kaminoans are certainly not thinking in that fashion. So there's a bit of a power struggle, if you will, happening between Nala Se and the Prime Minister, Lama Su, and poor Taun We gets caught up in the middle of it and gets killed for her trouble. Taun We, if you will recall, is the Kaminoan who met Obi-Wan Kenobi in Attack of the Clones and introduced him to Jango Fett and Boba Fett all those years ago. And in a nice little touch, Rena Owen was the person who did the voice of Taun We in Attack of the Clones, and they brought Rena back to do the voice of Taun We in this episode as well. And so the Taun We situation leads to a showdown between Cad Bane and Fennec Shand, and this is what we talked about in the other episode, the idea that Fennec wouldn't let the bounty go, but we are realizing in this episode that there are more complicated reasons why that's the case. And the fight that they have is a tremendous knockdown, drag out, it is awesome. This is one of the best fights in animation with Lucasfilm that I can recall in quite a while. Like, they really go at it, and despite the fact that Cad Bane tries to, throw her off her game by suggesting that she's not ready to go up against somebody as experienced as he is, well, she certainly gives him a run for his money. And, really gets the best of him, basically. I mean, even though neither of them wound up with Omega, she certainly did what she was setting out to do, which is make sure that Omega did not fall into the hands of Lama Su, and she managed to sabotage Cad Bane's ship on her way through the whole situation, so she was able to leave before Cad Bane was able to even have a shot at tracking the Bad Batch. And speaking of Fennec, that other scene that we saw in the mid-season sneak peek with her and Omega with those weird green stasis chamber tubes and Omega punching buttons on a control panel, well, that all happened in this episode as well. We find out that this is an abandoned Kaminoan facility in the Leto system, and we don't necessarily know where the Leto system is in relation to Kamino, but the Leto system is a brand new addition to Star Wars canon. It's not a planet that's been mentioned before, either in the current canon or in Legends. In the Borovio system, or the planet Borovio. Why am I saying vino? I guess I have wine on the mind. Borovio, that is where the facility is, and that's also a brand new planet. And this is a situation where it ultimately raises more questions rather than delivers any kind of answers, because there are Kaminoans in those tanks. I mean, it's like, why are there Kaminoans in these weird green chamber fluid things? It's kind of similar, or at least, reminds you a little bit of the tanks that we saw in the Siege in Chapter 12 of The Mandalorian, where, we heard the little Snoke music and they were like, what's going on here? And we found out that's when they were trying to infuse a bunch of other people with Grogu's blood. Don't know what was happening here, but it seems like the Kaminoans were experimenting on their own people, and how creepy is that? And Omega certainly gets the vibe and is like, I don't want to be caught and experimented on by my own people, just experimented on in general even. But hopefully she's not going to suffer that fate, and she's back in the hands of the Bad Batch by the end of this episode. Hunter makes her a promise that, I just feel like is going to get broken. I don't know. I can't I can't hear it and go, oh, this is going to backfire. The promise he makes is that Omega will never have to go back to Kamino again, and I see that promise getting broken by the end of this season somehow or another. But yeah, I guess we'll see what happens when the time comes. And so at this point now, I feel a lot more confident in saying that the only new stuff that's in that mid-season video peak is the stuff that seemed like it was sort of on either a Coruscant or a Vardos, like definitely an urban setting, not a rural setting, where the Bad Batch is trying to sneak in, and there are a bunch of Republic-era tanks moving around and clones riding them, and there's, a zip line fly through and zapping clone troopers and stuff like that. So I think that might be the only thing left that we haven't seen. But really, the kind of amazing thing is now that the Bad Batch has Omega back, and so quickly, we really now are out to sea with the rest of the season of the Bad Batch, because it's not like we're going to have 3 or 4 episodes where they're trying to find Omega. It's one episode and it's done. And so the idea of sort of looser 4-episode story arcs that we were talking about when we did the mid-season review, well, that seems to have been kind of wiped out with this one, with episode 9, because that whole recover Omega idea, well, that's been done. So kind of now what? Now where are we going to go, and what are they going to get into? They're still in contact with Sid. They're still trying to do work for her. So, probably going back to her, I would imagine. But yeah, there's got to be something more than this mercenary life for the Bad Batch and Omega, and I think we've got to see it by the end of the season. So there you go. That is the briefing for episode 9 of season 1 of the Bad Batch. It's Bounty Lost, although it's definitely a better kind of reunion than the reunion we had in the previous episode. And that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.